As we start our presentation here, I would like to ask you to consider what is a major purchase? What do you think, in your estimation, what would qualify for a major purchase? We're talking about major purchases tonight and how we can handle those major purchases, specifically if we should purchase things on credit or we should purchase them on, for example, on cash. So what do you think that a major purchase qualifies for, or how? What's the definite deadline? Not the deadline, but the demarcation zone, if you will, between something that is a small purchase or X amount of value, or something that is really a big purchase, and you need to think about it and you need to think it through. What would you think? What would be that threshold? Okay, so appliances, that would be one, right? Cabin at the lake, definitely. And especially if you get a good deal on a cabin on the lake, then that would be an even better thing. What else? What other purchases would qualify for a major purchase in your estimation? And let's go even more pragmatically deeper into this. What would you think the dollar amount would be where you would start saying this is the major purchase, this isn't a major purchase? So everything that you need to finance would qualify for a major purchase. Okay, so that's pretty good. What about the rest of you? What would you think? If it's in the thousands, that's good. These are not wrong answers. Actually, really are good answers. I'm just curious about the diversity of opinion and the mind frames, your mind frames of what do you think, in your estimation, the dollar amount would be. So what about in the back there? What would you think that the dollar amount would qualify for a major purchase? What dollar amount? Okay, so if you would buy an airplane, you would have a very good strip in Lewistown so you can use it, right? There you go. Oh, anything that you can pay cash for, okay. Would anything come to mind as when it comes to dollar amount? Would it be in the hundreds? Would it be in the thousands? What would qualify for a major purchase in your estimation? This is a very relative subject because everybody thinks differently, and that's all also subject to income and subject to material wealth to all of us. So if we are like millionaires, probably a major purchase wouldn't qualify for, like, $300 wouldn't qualify for a major purchase because we are millionaires. But if we are on average income, I think the state of Montana has an average income of about $40,000, plus or minus. So if you make about $40,000, what would that major purchase be in terms of dollar amounts? What do you think? Would it be? Okay, so Zeke, you are pointing towards our slideshow. Oh, the TV. So the TV cost, average TV LCD costs between 400 to a couple of $1,000. So okay, so you're sticking with the point that if you have to finance something, that would be a major purchase. All right, well, let's start with this very interesting study that I read the other day, in which Dave Ramsey was saying on his radio show that at $300 and higher, if you spend it cash, there is actually, the study showed that there's actually a physical response in the brain that tells you that, boy, this is not really, you don't really want to do this. This is kind of like an uncomfortable stimuli, if you will, to spend $300 cash. And if you would have to talk with your wife or your spouse about, just out of curiosity, how many of you have an agreement with your spouse and you say, hey, sweetheart, if we want to spend above this particular threshold in our household, we will call each other, we'll talk about it, we'll sit down, and then we'll hash it out. Any of you guys have something like that? Or you have a blank check and you can go out and buy that boat or that cabin on the lake? Or you wish, right? So none of us have a blank slate in which we can go out and say, hey, honey, look what I did. And you show up with a 24-foot boat, and then you sleep in the boat that night. So we don't have that kind of a pull or leverage with our spouses. So in terms of our presentation tonight, I think that answering the question, what is a major purchase, would qualify, most of your answers would qualify. If you have to finance something, that probably would be a major purchase. And if you want to buy a cabin at the lake, that probably would qualify for a major purchase. Or Carl, if you want to buy that plane of yours, that probably would qualify for a major purchase, right? Or replacing an entire roof, that would qualify for a major purchase. So these are some of the big purchases. Let's see some of examples that we have here. Do you think a big house like this would qualify for a major purchase? Absolutely. I mean, this is a two-story house. Just looking at the image, probably in the area of a couple of $1 million. So obviously, none of us have a couple of $1 million here in the heart of Lewistown to purchase this kind of a mansion. But the point was that any dwelling that exceeds a certain amount of money, and specifically when you buy a house, that will qualify for major purchase. Now, what about an education? Would an education qualify for a major purchase? If you're sending your son, I know some of you here in the audience are having children in college, and you are making sure that their college education and tuition is paid for, and I'm pretty sure that that costs the tunes of thousands of dollars, and you don't really have to go to college anymore to incur that kind of expense when it comes to education. If you send your child to a private school, for example, today, even in middle school, even that could cost quite a bit of money. We know that locally here in our conference, we have a private academy. It's called Mount Alice Academy, and I think 1 year is about $14,000 or so, give or take. And that is a very expensive tuition, if you will. Now, of course, you have to kind of look at the benefit ratio versus spending ratio. If it's a good education and if it's worth it, then you kind of make sure that that can happen. But the point is, an education is something that is expensive, and it's very much worth it if you're at that particular point. Now, what about cars? Do you think cars, this particular one, is this counting for major purchase? Would you think so? Yes, obviously, and I think I mentioned the other day, this is a $500,000 car. So obviously, this is a huge major expense. I don't think that you would have a very beautiful welcoming at home if you show up in something like this and you say, well, you know, sweetheart, don't worry, it's only $1,200 for the first few minutes you drive it. And then, of course, the monthly payment is about $2,500. It's more than your household, right, can earn. Okay, well, let's just kind of keep it very light and uh, funny here. Do you think a motorcycle would count for a major purchase? You could pick up a motorcycle for a few $100s or a couple of $1,000s. Not probably this one. This is a Ducati, and these are very, very expensive motorcycles. But just average. We have some people who like motorcycles pretty well. You have even quite a few of them at home. Do you think that this would qualify for a major purchase? Obviously. So everything that has value, particularly, and I like to go with what Zeke has mentioned earlier, if you have to finance something, most probably will qualify for a major purchase. Now, what about the remodel? Let's say you have this kind of kitchen in your household, and you kind of are willing and wanting to get into the 21st century because that homesteading missional 1840s or 1850s mind frame, it doesn't kind of work for you anymore, and you kind of want it to update to kind of this. I mean, this is just beautiful and nice and airy and light, and you want it. Do you think a kitchen remodel or home remodel would qualify for major purchase? Oh yeah. Do you know what an average kitchen remodel would cost today in 2017 in the United States of America? About $50,000. That's the middle average. And I was thinking, my wife and I bought a dilapidated home that it was a foreclosure, and we are slowly remodeling it as we go because we like to pay cash for pretty much everything. And we have done the outside, we have done a lot of different things, and we're going to go slowly. We have done the first deck in the front. We're going to do the back deck this summer before the summer is over. And perhaps if we can afford it, this year we'll start in one of the bathrooms or so, or if not, then next year we'll have to remodel the bathrooms and the kitchen. And we were thinking, well, sweetheart, what do you think we should spend on this kitchen? Because we kind of wanted to make it nice so we can resell it at some point. And we say, well, what do you think, $2,000, $3,000 or whatever? Well, I don't know. Let's just look it up online, how much they cost. So then we kind of went online, of course, and we Googled it and say how much is average for a kitchen. And we almost had a heart attack, proverbially speaking, because the average kitchen remodel in North America costs $50,000. And if you want to skimp on some of the things, and if you want to kind of do just a mediocre doesn't mean bad, it just means that you kind of use budget items, nothing fancy, that's between $20,000 and $30,000. Well, guess what? That the entire remodel budget for the house is less than that. So you see what I'm saying? That it is very expensive to remodel today in North America. Just appliances are in the thousands of dollars depending on your style and depending on your tastes. Now, if you want to go a little simpler, you can find things that cost to the tunes of hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars. But point is, it is very expensive to remodel a house today. Now, what about appliances? Let's say you've been having this refrigerator from the 1945, and you really cannot sell it as a relic. Museums do not accept it anymore because they have Freon in it. So what do you do? Well, you go into one of those big box stores and you kind of look at this beautiful kitchen appliance, which is a refrigerator, and say, okay, this is the one I wanted. But the price tag says $1,200. What do? Do you buy it or not? Well, it just depends on your overall financial budgeting system and overall your mind frame. If you have saved up for it, then you can afford to buy it. If you haven't saved up for it, you have to finance it, like one of you mentioned it. So there's different strategies, but the point is, again, this is a major purchase because it takes resources away from your overall budget. Now, what about other appliances? Washers and dryers. Do you think that those cost a little? Oh, yes. When we bought the house, my wife and I wanted to buy a dryer that kind of correlates with color and style and the same functionality and utilitarianism aspects of our washer. And we went outside to the big box stores to see what will it cost. And we were almost dumbfounded because a simple dryer, okay, so it has probably a little bit of a few fancy stuff on it, but a simple dryer costs $1,600. Can you imagine $1,600 for a simple dryer? I mean, a simple dryer, and it has a little bit of perhaps a couple of complicated programs, delicate cycles and non-delicate cycles and whatever. I can't even remember them. But we looked at each other and said, this is ridiculous. I mean, why would you want to pay $1,600 for a dryer? I mean, that is just very expensive. So what do? We don't believe in buying it on credit. So we have one choice, actually two. Don't buy the dryer or save up and buy the dryer. Or perhaps a third option, buy a cheaper dryer, right? So what we did, we went on Craigslist. And of course, we looked around and we waited for a very long time, quite a few months. And one time, this particular family bought the exact same dryer and they didn't like it because it didn't fit in their smaller rental apartment. And they discounted it, so we bought it just for a few $100s. I think we bought it for about $350 or $400, brand new. Now you're talking my price. Yeah, that was my price too. That's why I didn't buy it from the store. But you see, we think that, oh, a dryer or a washer or a refrigerator, it's not a big deal. We can just kind of put it on a Target or like the credit card or whatnot, and you don't think much about it. But that thing, as we can see a little bit later on, it's going to add up. What about some other things that we could consider for major purchases? Do you think gym equipment is a big deal? I mean, some of you really like to exercise. I'm not looking in any general direction. My wife and I wanted to buy an elliptical, and we were hunting an elliptical. And do you know what an elliptical costs these days? Yeah, about 3,000 if you want to go high end. But I'm not high end, so we always look at the low end, right? Because that's what we can afford. The low end is about anywhere between $900, the really low ones, anywhere between $900 to $1,500, give or take. So again, we said, okay, thank you, no thank you. We're not going to go this way. So what do? We started patronizing thrift stores. And there's a thrift store in Billings. It's called St. Vincent de Paul. And we always like these thrift stores because we just patronize them and we know that the proceeds go to really good causes because they help people with difficulties in society and whatnot. So we went to this particular thrift store, and guess what? There was an elliptical. And I'll show you later on how to negotiate and how to do this and things like this. But I went into there and they had $100 price tag, and I said, oh yeah, this is my world. And it was very good. There's nothing wrong. There was nothing wrong with this elliptical machine. The only problem that it had, it didn't have a power cord. It was about 5 years old. Okay, that's the only problem. So I asked, would you like to give me a discount on this? And she didn't want to do that at the time. So then I walked out and I went away. I want to make a long story short. A few days later, I went again to that thrift store, and I had my son Christopher with me, and you know he's a blue-eyed blonde little boy, very charming, very good-looking. And when I told her the previous day that we have triplets and whatnot, and oh, this is one of the triplets, Christopher, and what, and then she, oh, come here, and I said just very casually, are you still at $100 of that elliptical machine? And she looks at me, she looks at Christopher, and she says, well, you know what, today only for you, I'll give it to you for $15. And I was looking, I was like really dumbfounded, and I said, are you for real? I mean, I was thinking that $75 or $50 or whatnot. So we bought a perfectly good elliptical machine that works flawlessly for $15. I'll show you a picture next time when I come up. I'll snap a picture. So instead of paying $1,600 or $500 for an elliptical, we have one for $15. And as a bonus, she threw in another bicycle, a stationary bicycle for $10, which costs $200 at one of those big box stores. So you can spend an arm and a leg for anything, but you don't have to. Now I'm going to go to your personal favorite one. What about those massive Ferguson good tractors? Do you know what I'm talking about? Those really, really good ones? Or if you like the green, the John Deere's, I'm not going to start a war here, okay? I know some of you guys are biased. But what about a tractor? Is that a major investment or a major purchase? Do you know how much a Ferguson costs these days? Or depending on the brand or depending on the age and whatnot. But they can cost anywhere from several $1,000s into the tens of thousands if they're really good preserved collectible items. What about a vacation? I mean, I'm sorry, not a vacation. What about a yacht? I mean, you like planes. Some people might like yachts because yachts are the really big deal now. I mean, the longer the better, the bigger the better. Do you think it's a major investment? Well, I can't afford this particular one, but I can afford the next one. This is my budget. This is where I can understand. This is a pretty good investment. I mean, to each his own, right? So I kind of like this particular one. That doesn't have to cost me a lot. I can buy it for a couple $100 and I can float down the Mississippi with it. What about a vacation? Is that a big deal? A vacation can be also a major investment or a major expense depending on how, again, your mental frame works. If you believe in spending on a card, that is not a good investment, but it's a major purchase, right? And if you believe in saving it up and having it paid cash so it doesn't follow you for a couple of years at home after you come home from vacation, that's a different story. So how should we pay? Should we pay with credit or should we pay with cash? Well, let's go. I'm not going to go through all of those that I've already mentioned, but we'll go to a few of the core principles and the core purchases that most of us have to buy. Probably we're not going to buy a yacht or a helicopter or a plane or whatnot, but which one of us have not bought a house at some point in our past history? All of us probably have bought a house. So let's go to the house first. The first question I have to ask myself about a house, am I ready to own a house? I know that there is a big dysfunctionality when it comes to the discussion between should I rent or should I own, but it's a very, very fair question. If I'm not ready for owning a house, I shouldn't jump in and leap into purchasing a house for $100,000 or a couple of $100,000 because it's going to be a nightmare instead of a dream. We shouldn't do it. It's perfectly all right, perfectly okay to rent for X amount of years if that's what you can afford, because then you have peace of mind. My wife and I particularly live in the United States for about 20 years, and the first house that I purchased in the United States was only about 5 years ago. Okay, I was an undergrad before, I was in graduate studies, now I was in postgraduate studies. So I didn't, and the circumstances were such that we didn't want to buy a house because we didn't know where we were stationed, if I had to go back to Europe or if I have to stay here. There are circumstances. So depending on your personal circumstance, either financial or social, you don't have to jump into buying a house. And just because people buy a house, don't feel pressured, peer pressure to say, oh, wait a second, I've been married 2.5 minutes and I don't have a mortgage already, so I'm going to go to somewhere. Right? No, you shouldn't think like that. You always have to think about the affordability factor. Am I ready to own a house? Do I have my finances in order? And we'll go through that process in a little bit. First things that we have to think about when you purchase a house. I know for some of us it's impossible at this particular point, but not for everybody. Some people can afford to buy cash, and that's the best way to buy a house, period. Now, you have to remember when you're reared in a society that promotes something so vociferously for X amount of time, you believe that there's no other way. And unfortunately, our consumer society has drilled this idea into us that because we here we are never be able to buy a house on cash because it's almost impossible. That's not a true statement. Okay, that is not a true statement. Now, it is true that because of that dependence on economic models in this country, and we have developed a dependency on that economic model and thus a spending pattern that prevents us to purchase a house on cash. But there are plenty of people who have gone out there, have saved very much, and when they purchased their first house, they purchased it out cash. Now, of course, they didn't purchase a palace. They probably purchased a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom or something very small or something dilapidated, perhaps well, not condemned, but perhaps it was just a foreclosed property. And people do it all the time. And they're not geniuses. They're not rich people. There's so many examples, and I'm not going to go through that, but this is possible. Now, it might not be possible for some of us because, again, the dependency model that we have instituted in our own personal mind frames, and to some extent, you are not the faulty of that, or you are not at fault because of it, but to some extent we are. Because if we allow ourselves to believe some economic models that are detrimental to us, then we perhaps should shoulder some of the responsibility. Now, if by chance you are not able to buy a house cash, then what's the other model? You have to borrow, you have to buy on credit. And perhaps this is the only one, or perhaps one or two things that you could buy on credit that will at some point historically bring you more value than less value. Now, of course, we had a little bit of a dilemma there in the 2006 and 2008 period where housing prices have decreased instead of increased because there was a housing bubble. So that wasn't the case at that point. Values have not gone up, but they have gone down. But for the most part, historically speaking, house values have increased the wealth of the individual who has purchased a home. So you had, on average, depending on regions, 2 to 5% increase annually on that particular investment. So housing, it's a good investment overall in most cases. That doesn't mean that it always works out well, okay? It just doesn't. You have to kind of figure it out and take into account the circumstantial things of a particular time frame. Now, what I like to do when I buy a home, or what I would do in the future also, always try to look at distressed properties or bank-owned properties. When we were ready to buy a home, that's what we did. We looked around and we looked for a distressed property which was bank-owned because somebody didn't pay their mortgage, and that's what we wanted to do because we knew that we can get it cheaper. It's always cheaper if you buy one of these bank-owned properties or a foreclosure. Now, before you buy a house, there are certain financial things that you have to kind of do. And it's kind of pure logic. You already probably know this, but we'll just refresh them really quickly. You have to save up for a down payment, period. If you don't save up for a down payment, at least minimum 20%, then you will have automatically a PMI attached to your loan. A PMI is a private mortgage insurance, and that will cost you anywhere between $75 to $140 depending on your credit score and report and depending on financial circumstances. So this per month, yes, per month. So this is the insurance policy for the lender who lends you the money. In case you default on that property, they will be paid back. And the whole system, the way it works, the money that you're paying in PMI goes to a third party that has nothing to do with the bank. Some private insurance company will insure your mortgage, and then you paying that to that third party, and then the bank gets paid back out of that insurance should you default on that loan. Now, if you have 20% or more on your house that you purchase, then you don't have to buy PMI, because people will say, okay, so if you have at least 20% invested in this property, you're less likely to walk away from it, or you're more responsible. And thus, the risk factor will will decrease instead of grow. And that's the reason why you can avoid PMI. Now, it's very obvious that when you want to buy your first house, or even the second or whatnot, if you're financially astute, then you always will buy below your means. You never buy up. This is such a misnomer, and unfortunately, so many of us Americans do not pay attention to this. We have this upward trend. It's called trading up. There's a wonderful book about this phenomenon written by a couple of guys, and I can reference that at the end if you'd like to. It's called trading up. For some reason, we believe that every time that we buy, we have to buy up, not down, or not maintain the same status. We always have to have a little bit bigger, a little bit fancier, a little bit nicer, a little bit whatnot. And we don't realize that when we do that, buying up or trading up will increase our taxes, because buying up also always means nice, and it's a code word for more taxes. A more established neighborhood, a more established home, a bigger square footage will always charge you more taxes. So not only that you're increasing your financial footprint when it comes to a liability, but also in the long run you will be poorer because of that. But for some reason, we believe that that's the trend. That's what we have to do. And of course, there's a wonderful saying in the American culture, which I learned later on, keeping up with the Joneses. And first time when I heard this as a European, I said, what in the world? Who are the Joneses? Right? And then I realized that it's just kind of one of those sayings that keeping up with the Joneses means that you want to have the same level of lifestyle, if you will, like your parents or your grandparents had in 1 year when they worked for it about 30 or 40 years. You can't do that. I mean, you can do it if you'd like to, but that's why we have housing crisis bubbles, because we buy more than we afford and we can't afford it in the long run. And then the bubble bursts and the economy collapses, sinks. So always buy smaller. It's okay to buy small. Small is very cool today. I mean, there's a whole subculture of people, millennials especially, that they are going out and they're buying these tiny, tiny little homes, like 100 square foot or what are 200 square feet, and it's phenomenal because they used to cost about $25,000 for the smaller trailer homes, very, very tiny homes. And now, because it's such a big trend, the prices are increasing to $50,000 and $60,000. Some of them are even $80,000. I mean, you could buy a real home for that, not a little bit dinky home. So buy always smaller, not bigger. Drive the neighborhood. Talk to the neighbors. I mean, before you get into a particular neighborhood, just go out and see it. Go out at night, go out in the daytime, kind of park your car, read a half a book, see what the people react when they come home. Don't go in the morning because everybody's at work. Go in the afternoon and see how the people react around their own homes. Are they kept? Are they not kept? The households, are they kept? Because if they are not, then kind of spells a little trouble sometimes. You want to familiarize yourself as much as you can. Improve your credit score. Now, I told you the other day that credit scores are not as important from one perspective, but from the other perspective is very, very important, because if you don't have the money to invest in a new purchase, in a big major purchase, such as a house or a car, whatnot, or a boat, helicopter, whatever you fancy, then you have to go to borrow the money. And I told you before that every single dollar that is printed in the United States of America already carries an interest on it. That interest is just passed along or multiplied at sometimes from a commercial bank to a retail bank, and from a retail bank to you as a customer, and it's magnified, and everybody tags on a little bit more. So you end up paying a big interest on it. So if you don't have a good score, a credit score, then your interest will be higher, and on the long run you will pay thousands and tens of thousands of dollars extra in extra fees. So this is the reason why it's extremely important to pay off your debts and have a very, very low debt to income ratio. I didn't know this at the time, but my score was a while ago in 750s or so, and we were carrying one particular debt because we wanted to establish a credit and whatnot, and we were able to pay it off because we had the money. We just chose not to pay it off because we were taught that if you carry a balance, then that improves your credit score. And we didn't realize that because we weren't as educated about finances at that particular time. So we said, well, you know what, let's just pay it off. We just don't want to deal with this, don't want to have any debt. So we paid off all that debt. And all of a sudden, from 750, our score went up to 820. And you know why? Because the income, because the debt ratio to the income ratio, to the credit ratio has totally drastically changed. And now the lenders were saying that you have lots of debt, but you have lots of credit, but you don't utilize that credit. It was less than 30%. Usually they say that if it's less than 30%, that's a pretty cool thing. So we had like probably 5% utilization of credit, and then our credit score shot up really, really high. Now, have we known that a long time ago, then we would have done that, and then perhaps we would have gotten even better deals on other issues, such as house purchases and whatnot. So it's very, very important for you to look at your credit history, look at your credit score before you buy a purchase, before you buy a big house, a big purchase, such as a house, specifically at least a year in advance. It takes a little bit to percolate and change your score and fix things on your credit report if there's something to be fixed. Think about taxes. The bigger you go, the more taxes you pay. Period. And do you really, really need 4,500 square foot? Just think about it. What, you're going to have Monica coming in from the elite exclusive cleaning crew to clean your house? Can you afford her? You can't. Just think about it. There is a maxim here. After a certain time, it's irrelevant. Square footage is irrelevant because it's not going to make you happier either. So think about taxes when you think about a house. The higher you go, the more taxes you pay. And think about lower and up-and-coming areas. If you pay at the top of the market, we're always thinking you want to go into a neighborhood, look at the average price of the house in the neighborhood, and then buy the lowest price on that neighborhood. Because if you buy at the maximum, where is your upside going to be? If every house in the neighborhood is $400,000 or $200,000 and you buy it at that price, you're not going to make any profit. Because you want to think about the future. When you sell, you want to make a little bit of money. So if a house is about, let's say, $200,000, you want to buy a house, the ugliest duckling on the block, that costs $120,000 or $100,000 because you put a little money, you put a lot of spread equity in it, and you probably make a little bit of upside. And if you sell it in 2 years, you don't even have to pay capital gains after that, after 2 years. So it's a pretty good, cool deal. Check your credit score. Do not apply for new credit. Period. If you apply for new credit in the process of buying a new house, the adjusters or the people who are trying to extend you the loan, the lenders, they will think that you're kind of like scatterbrained everywhere and you don't know what you're doing, and they're not going to approve you for your loan. Okay? Keep all the credit lines open, not because you want to spend them, but the longer, this is a kind of like a one piece of pie in that big, beautiful credit score strategy of Per Isaac, the longer you have an established open account from the past, they rationalize that you are trustworthy and you paid your debts and you are less likely to be a high risk for a lender to lend you money. Now, keep your score about 750 if you really, really want to get a good rate. Anything below 750 will give you a different rate based upon your circumstances, financial or otherwise. If you have a 750 and up, you probably will get some of the best rates the market can offer. And then, of course, calculate before you go. Don't just go and buy a house and say, okay, I'm going to buy this big, beautiful house and whatnot. I'm going to be happy forever after. Most probably you will live, if you're an average American, between 3 to 7 years in a house. Period. Some people live longer in it, but how many of you had more than one house in your lifetime? Nobody?
Say that again.
How many of you had more than one house?
I
Okay, we had 3 so far, so, and we're not even that old, right? So you will probably exchange those homes for other ones, better or worse and whatnot, and you have to calculate expense. They say, people say, who are professional at this stuff, they say that you have to have a ratio of less than 30% of your income spent on housing. About some people sometimes are a little bit more magnanimous and they go to 33%, but on average about 30% of your household income has to go on your household expenses such as mortgage and insurance and whatnot. So calculate some of those expenses. How much can you afford a month? This is the good thing to ask those questions. Can I afford it? Can I not afford it? Remember the closing costs. Those are also part of the deal. It's usually, when we did our house, it cost about, I think on one side it was $12,000 on one end, and our part was about I want to say about $3,400 or so. That's a lot of money. $3,400. That's closing costs. And then, of course, think about the annual upkeep of the home. Usually, on average, about 2 to 3% of your house value. That's how much you're going to put in maintenance and taxes and whatnot over one particular year. So, do you really want to get a big house? You see, every time that you go big, you're taxed because people say, oh, well, he can afford it. She can afford it. Well, let's do that. So it's a progressive tax. So get financing in place before you go and buying a house. Don't just say, hey, sweetheart, let's go to see, this is such a good neighborhood. Let's go there. Oh, man, I would just love, it was just so wonderful to get our baby in this beautiful neighborhood, to establish trees and whatnot. Can you afford it? Can you afford the trees and the leaves on that street? Think about it. Visit open houses and specifically take a course about how to buy a house. There are plenty of them. Some of them are free. Some of them are a minor fee for them. When we started having babies, which it only happened once with 3 coming out in one shot, but we went to a class offered for babies. Now, we didn't do that with the house because we didn't know that existed. But since then, we educated ourselves. But go to a class, because you can learn a tremendous amount of things. Don't think that you know everything about homes. You don't. I don't. Period. So take a class. Interview realtors. Even if you don't want to buy right then, ask about the general neighborhood in which you want to buy in. Ask prices. Ask issues. Just educate yourself. Save 20% of your income for 24 to 36 months before you buy a house. Save it because it's possible. If you do that, then you have not only that big chunk, 20% of down payment, and you avoid PMI over the long stretch. That's a lot of money, about $1,200, $1,300 a year. What would you do with an extra $1,200, $1,300 a year? Wouldn't that be cool? You could go, in 2 years, you could go on that vacation. Or in 2 years, you could buy that refrigerator or motorcycles or whatnot, or whatever you want to do, and that's going to last another 5, 10 years. So that $1,200 is a lot of money if you don't think about it. Now, do we want to buy 30 years or 15 years? And
15. This
is always dependent on personal circumstances. Now, both of them have advantages and disadvantages. I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts of that. We'll talk about that some other time, perhaps. But the bottom line is, if you don't have the money, then you probably have to go, and you need to buy a house because the circumstances are such a thing, then you probably have to go with a 30-year plan. Now, the disadvantage for that is that you will pay a tremendous amount of interest over the lifespan of the loan. It's about 2.4 times the value of the home. So if you, for example, buy a house for $200,000, if you keep that loan till maturity, then you probably will pay anywhere between $400,000 and up for the price of that house. And that's a tremendous amount of money. I mean, I don't really like that system, but that's how we work here in this country. Now, of course, your monthly rental or monthly payments are going to be lower with a 30-year-old loan versus a 15-year-old loan. But the 15-year-old, what happens? At the 15-year-old, it's done. So you pay less money in interest charges if you have a 15-year-old loan. So the disadvantage is you pay more up front, but you will pay less over the long haul in interest rates. Okay? So again, most people advocate for going with a 15-year-old loan. I am a little bit more nuanced on this, and I'm not a professional at this, but I always think about circumstances. What is your circumstance? For example, we were living in a farm, gorgeous farm. One of our friends let us rent their farm, and it was just wonderful. We loved it, and we would have probably wanted to live for the rest of our ministry there in that particular, but they one day decided to move back home. So then what do we have to do? We had to go and buy a house. We were at that particular point in our life that we were ready to buy a house. So what do? Well, you see, if you're forced to buy a house, when I say forced, I'm saying you are ready and all that kind of stuff, then you can afford to get a 15-year-old loan, right? If not, then you have to go the other way. There's both ways, advantages and disadvantages. I don't think that a 30-year-old loan is better because, or a 15-year-old loan is better than a 30 because you pay less interest. What if you can afford to pay that? What if you are responsible and you go into a 30-year-old loan, and whenever you have money extra, you will pay extra on that loan? We still do that. We pay extra. We're probably, if everything works out and no major issues, we will pay our house up in about 7 or 8 years instead of 15 or 30. Okay? But that again takes that personal responsibility factor into account. So don't believe people when they say go with the 15 because that's the best thing. Yes, it is in certain circumstances. So you have to be realistic about that. And in some circumstances, the 30-year loan works better. And if you really want to think about the calculations, you might not even have to be 30 years into that home because you move or whatnot. Inspection. Inspection and appraisal costs are very, very important. They are running anywhere between $400 and $600 depending on location, depending on circumstances, square footage, and whatnot. But those are some things that are very, very important. You have to appraise. I tell you, I cannot tell you how important an appraisal is. We made a deal on one of our houses, and the bank wanted to have an extra amount of dollars, and we kind of we said, okay, this is a good deal, we'll go with this. And we said, we'll give you this price, but subject to appraisal. And the bank accepted that. So then when we came back, and the appraisal came back and told, hey, this house is valued about $20,000 or $25,000 less than what they said, this house is worth $25,000 less. We went to the bank with that piece of paper, and since it was public record, because that went in the public record of that home, the bank said, okay, we'll give it to you with that. So it cost us $500 to do an appraisal, but we saved $24,500. Think about that. That's pretty cool. And the bank said, okay, they accepted it. So home insurance is extremely important. Sometimes if you have a loan, it's obligatory or whatnot, but you have to have an insurance. So that's pretty much about the housing situation. And of course, there's tons and tons of other things. And if you want to, you can go to my website, andrewdooley.com, and there's tons of books. And I'm not selling anything, okay? I'm not telling you to go there because I'm saying I have nothing on sale. Everything is free on the website, so free resources. But there's tons of books that can give you more in-depth information. And we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to talk too much about the rest of it. Okay, what about cars? How many of you guys have cars at home? All right. How many of you guys have at least 1 or 2 cars? I have 2 cars. I used to have 3 cars, but I only have 2 now. Some of you are smiling because you know what kind of car I had, right? Boy, that was a little nice ride. But that was a business decision, so we made money on it. So how do we buy a car? We know that it's a major purchase. Do we buy it on credit, and do we buy it on cash? What do you think? Silence.
Buy the cash if you got it.
Obviously, the best policy to buy a car is to buy it cash if you are able to. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot buy a car if you don't have the cash. Unfortunately, again, there's various circumstances, various ways to deal with this. But if you can afford it, buy a car with cash. And if this is the car that you can afford, hey, there's nothing wrong. This is a collectible. Do you know what that car is, by any chance?
No.
It's a BMW. And it's called a BMW Isetta. Yep, it's a BMW Isetta. So you can run in this BMW Isetta and you can say, hey, I am driving a BMW. What's wrong with you? Huh? I mean, if you really want to go for that status thing, this is just kind of like a joke, but It's always good to go on cash. Buy it off cash. If you can't afford it, then you have to borrow. Now, you want to lease? We'll talk a little bit about that. You never ever ever want to lease a car. I personally do not like leases because you basically are renting a car, and at the end of the rental agreement you have to turn in the car and you don't even have the money. You don't even have an asset in your hands that you own. So the leasing is the least profitable from a financial standpoint for you. Now, I know that some people say, hey, I have a new car every 2 years or every 3 years and whatnot, and that's pretty cool. I can smell that brand new leather and all that. Well, if you're so high on chemicals, be my guest. I'm not. I don't care about new cars. I bought only one time in my life a brand new car, and I said, I swore off myself, never again. I was fresh out of my graduate studies, and I went back into my first full-time job, and I said, I deserve a car. I was 20 some years old, green as a pea. I didn't think much, and I wanted to go. I special ordered a brand new Subaru car from the factory. It was 2008, and I had a 2009 brand new Subaru. And I said, oh my, this is a cool car. And it was beautiful. I special ordered from the factory, special color. I wanted a particular color. It was gorgeous. 8 months later, I went to a conference. On the way out, somebody didn't stop at a stoplight, T-boned me, and totaled the car. I lost several $1,000s on that car because it was devalued. It didn't make any difference. I only had a couple of thousand, few thousand miles on it. It was practically a brand new car. It was hit, it was totaled, the insurance paid me back, but it was a discounted value based upon the status that it was a used car. I learned that lesson so hard. I swore myself I never buy a brand new car. It's not worth it. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Now, there's nothing wrong with biking. There's nothing wrong with public transport if you have something like that in your particular area. Not every particular area has public transport, but if there's availability for that, that's cool. Again, like the houses, in this particular major purchase, also the affordability factor comes into place. If you can afford it, why not? If you can afford these beasts, hey, go for it. I mean, when I say afford it, you have to have cash, and you have to have all the rest of your financial plan into place, and you don't take something away from someone else. I'm thinking from savings or from a college fund or something like that. I mean, it would be so irresponsible to say, hey, I want to have a Mercedes-Benz or a Land Rover or some car, and well, I have the money, I can cash in my 401k for it. Obviously, that wouldn't work. So if this is not what you can afford, this is what you can afford, this Oldsmobile, this is what you should have. Now we're talking. Or if this big beast is not your thing, you can go import a little one, a Fiat Cinquecento or a Fiat 500, right? This is a very tiny. And if you want to go even tinier, you could go with the East German Trabant. Have you heard about the East German Trabants? They're very tiny car. I used to drive it for a Jewish lady in Budapest, Hungary in 1997. And they had a little swimming place. They were selling swimming necessities for swimmers at the pool side. And they had this little car, and I was their chauffeur. I was a student in seminary back then, and they hired me out as a part-time student to drive them because they didn't know how to drive. So every single morning, for the whole summer, it had only 2 cylinders. 2 cylinders, and it had that little hand crank thing. It was made by Communist East Germany. Boy, that was a cool car. I loved it. That was one of my first cars that I drove. So if that's what you can afford, it was very cheap and it was very easy to fix. 2 cylinders, nothing major, just a little bit of a motorcycle engine on it. Or you could go with an i8, $100,000, $150,000 BMW, right? Just think about what can you afford. Now again, the same systems that were placed for the house are valid here. You have to have a credit that is okay. You have to think about affordability. You have to think about utility. Now, if you come down with a BMW i8 downtown Lewistown, you're out of place, right? I mean, think about it. No, I mean, you might have a nice few onlookers, but somebody will tell you, well, this guy either he's big hat, no cattle, or he's an exhibitionist, a narcissistic someone who wants to show off with his new toy. So you kind of have to think about utility. If you live in Montana, you probably don't really want to drive a car that has 2.5 millimeter clearance from the road. It doesn't work.
No.
Now think about, again, cash. If you can buy it cash, that's the best way. So again, the question is, should I borrow? Should I lease? Should I buy a used car? Here's what I think it's the best thing for me personally, and you kind of have to think what's good for you. Never ever buy a brand new car. We'll see why in a minute. If you can pay it cash. Never borrow. On average, if you save in a sinking fund approach, which means that you put aside money a little bit aside every month, in about 2 years you could buy a fairly decent car, anywhere between $3,000 to $7,000. But again, you have to think about utility. If you have triplets, you can't buy a convertible, right? You can't do that and keep it forever. But how do you buy it? Do you buy it used? Yes. I always only buy used cars now, because you can buy cars that are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old and they're absolutely gorgeous and perfect. There's nothing wrong with them. They're a little used, they're a little different, but hey, somebody else drove those cars and they took a hit on the depreciation factor for you, and you were saved. I mean, one of you were so happy and they came outside the other day and said, hey, you see, this is how you buy cars. You let your brother-in-law or whoever take the depreciation factor down. That was pretty cool. I thought, boy, that's a smart cookie. It doesn't even have macadamia in it. So I buy it, all my vehicles on Craigslist. I know that's a little bit interesting, but every car that we own for the past 5 to 7 years, we bought it on Craigslist. Period. Because you can negotiate with people. They start high or whatever, and by the time you're done, you can negotiate a fairly decent price. All of our cars, no exception, in the past 7 years were purchased on Craigslist. Sorry? That's true. I'm not, yes, this full disclosure, I'm not advocating Craigslist. The guy doesn't pay me anything, or I don't have a contract with him. I don't care about him. For us, this is what worked. I don't really enjoy buying a car from a dealer, not even a used car, because some of them are so obnoxiously rude, and they use you and they think you are a total unintelligent human being. Period. And I don't like to deal with that. I mean, I like to pay a fair price for a car. I like to do business with someone who is fair and right and respectful. But some people have a little bit of a problem with their intelligence when it comes to basic manners. And I don't like that. So, no new cars depreciate 20% the very first year. And I showed you that, I'll show you this slide here. If you take that beautiful car, of course the price is a little different. That car is 500,000, not 29,000, okay? But if you take any car brand new and you take it off the lot, you lost 20% of the value right off the bat. And then subsequently, every single year that you drive that car, you lose anywhere between, I think it was 20 to 25%, no, 15 to 20% loss in its value every single year. Period. So if you want to buy a really, really nice car, buy a 5-year-old or 6-year-old car. Because after that year, the depreciation kind of plateaus and you're fine. That's pretty cool. So that's why all of our cars, well, actually we do double take on that, because all of our cars are 10 years old or older. But they only have about 100,000 or less in mileage, and they're really good, solid cars. We drive German cars and we drive import cars. We have a little Honda. Now, Hondas are very, very good cars. They're nothing fancy. There's nothing to write about. They're just a simple basic utility car, but they work and they work and they run and they run and they run forever. And you can work on them too. So do not buy a car that is brand new if you can afford it. Buy used, because you will have someone else pay the depreciation factor on that car. Why would you really want to do that? Why do you want to take $100 and give someone $20 just because you drive 2.4 miles off the road? Why? Think, well, what would you do if you take that 20% and invest it in somewhere and in a long-term investment fund, and you will gain money instead of losing money? You see, this is a game for everybody. These people are making this game in a way that you are always on the losing side if you end up buying new. Now, if you really think that new is the way to go, this is America, it's a free country, it's a market economy, go ahead. Please support the economy for the rest of us. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not being sarcastic. This is just reality. There are some people who will always want to buy that new car. And that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. I can't afford it. I don't want to afford it. I'll buy used because I'm okay. It will get me from point A to point B as well. Period. And there's, of course, you have to think about insurance, you have to think taxes, you have to think about upkeep and maintenance of some of these cars. I had a very good conversation with Ed that day. Oh, well, do you know that if something goes on your car, how much it's going to cost? And I said, yep, that's pretty true. So think ahead when you think about a car. Is this car going to cost me an arm and a leg if it breaks down? How much is it going to cost me to repair it? Is it going to be okay or not? We kind of had a little bit semi thing like that. Our fuel pump kind of went out, and it kind of had fuel smell in our car, and we had to price it, and it was about $1,600 to replace the fuel pump. And but we kind of had a little bit of a slack here because a letter came from the manufacturer and said, hey, we have to have a recall on this fuel pump, so go to the nearest representative or dealer and we'll do it for free. So we kind of had a pass on that. What about vacations? Should we do vacations on credit?
No.
It's a major purchase. I mean, if you just think about it, you want to go to Europe, 5 people, that's $5,000. That's quite a major purchase, right? You could remodel 2 bathrooms and a half with that, the cheap way, right? So vacations, never, ever, ever, ever. Did I say never, ever, ever pay with credit? Never. Go on the top of the hill, take a pina colada, and put some goggles on and think you're in Hawaii if that's what you can afford. But you will not go broke. I mean, there's so many wonderful things. I know some people who are always taking off every couple of few weeks, and they're MIA in action because they go to a perceived Hawaii, and that's pretty cool, right? You always should pay cash. Do not go into debt for a vacation. Have a sinking fund approach. That means you put aside, let's say you want to go to Hawaii, you want to go somewhere, then just put $100, $20, $30, whatever you can afford, put it in the sinking fund in an envelope system, and then set it aside. This is our vacation fund. And then you can go on that vacation and predetermine a sum. Okay, so probably I don't want to go to Hawaii. That's going to cost me airplanes. Let's go to Yellowstone. Oh, wait a second. By the way, Yellowstone is the wonder of the world, by the way. Everybody from all around the world comes to see Yellowstone. So if I live in Montana, forget about Hawaii. I'm going to go to Yellowstone because it's cheaper. I mean, a couple of tanks of gas, about $100 back and forth, and I have a wonderful time. I'll put another $100 or so for a couple of nights hotel, and for less than $500, I can have fun with my whole family. Now, that's not even enough for a half a ticket to Hawaii. So think about, make the calculations, predetermine the cost, do the research on that, know your numbers and set a limit. Say, I am not going to go over X amount of dollars, whatever that is. Now, what about other purchases? We have very, very little time left here, so I apologize for this. It looks like we have a lot of things to do, and we're just scratching the surface of this. What about other purchases? What about that couch that you're kind of eyeing, or the china cabinet, or something like that? Oh, but it would be so nice in my bedroom set, right? Or what about the couch? Or what about the beautiful chair, this modern new look, fresh, beautiful? Oh, how cool it would be not to have anything from thrift stores anymore, huh? Well, the biggest issue is the layaway, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Layaway is code for you cannot afford it. Period. There's nothing else, there's no other way to put it. If you have to put it on layaway, you cannot afford it. Period. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude or mean, but don't buy it. I mean, why would you? I mean, you have a couch that costs you $1,700, and you're paying interest on it X amount of time, years, because you can't afford it. You know that you have this very shiny, glossy little thing, advertisements that are coming in the mail every now and then, mattress sale or furniture sale or whatever sale, and it says 0% down for 24 months or 36 months or whatnot. You know what? Think about it. For that flyer to be in your local newspaper, it costs about $25,000 for whoever makes it to put it in the local newspaper. So what about legal advice to make sure that those people put something in that flyer that they can't be sued for? What about the printing? What about all the workers to set it up? That flyer is a lot of money. So there's no such thing as 0% down because they will catch at some point. If you're not careful, you're going to go into their store and you're going to see this beautiful couch and you say, oh, I'm going to get this on 0% down for 24 months. And guess what? 24 months go down and your child needs braces and your other child needs orthodontics. And then all of a sudden you have a spinal injury because something happened at your work and you have to take off about 6 weeks. You're not going to get paid that much. And then all of a sudden you're in arrears. What are you going to do? Oh man, wait a second, but I still have this couch to pay off. Oh, that couch is not as nicely smelling anymore, right? All of a sudden. And then oh, but just a little bit of interest. Guess what? In a small print, they say, most companies say that the interest will be charged retroactively, which means from the beginning if you go beyond the introductory rate of 0%. So something that should have cost you, for example, $1,000, let's say a couch for $1,000 is going to cost you in the end about $1,700 or $1,800. Now, why would you pay someone $800 in extra? I like to go to thrift stores. You can buy a very fairly decent couch for a couple $100. And if you don't like my couch, don't visit me. It's okay with me. I mean, what can I say? I have 3 small children. We were thinking we can afford a good couch, but why would you buy a new couch with 3 small children? Just a simple question. I mean, everybody's situation is a little different, but you have to think you will never want to go broke because you put something on layaway. Just don't do it. It's not fair. It's not right. There's a couple of big, you see them. I don't want to say them on radio, but there's a couple of those things that if you can't afford something, that you can go to these people and then you say, okay, I'll pay you monthly for this, and then I can own the rental center, not rental center, yeah, there you go. Don't do it. You will pay triple the price for one appliance, for example, if you do that way. Just save the money or buy cheaper stuff, save the money and do it that way. And of course, do you really want it or do you really need it? Do you really need a new stereo or whatever? Now, simplify. I mean, do you like that?
Yeah, no.
Isn't that cool? I mean,
I love that.
you do?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Sell it right away.
I mean, I like this one better. I like this one, simplicity. I love minimalism because minimalism declutters, decomplicates my life. Every time when I have less to worry about, less to deal with, life is better. So if I have the choice between this and this, I choose the latter. Period. Because I don't have to deal with so much. Simplicity is the best option in life. Trust me on this. When we die, and I don't want to depress you, but when we die, guess what happens? We only have afforded the pine box or an iron box or whatever. There's nothing much that you can bring with you unless you are an Egyptian pharaoh, okay? But those do not those do not exist anymore. So, well, I went to Aswan and I went to Memphis and some of the other Egyptian towns a few years ago on vacation, and boy, oh boy, the things that they buried the Egyptian pharaohs, it's astounding. So unless you're an Egyptian pharaoh, you will not be able to get anything with you. It's not worth it. So say no to credit-based shopping, buy less, think and calculate the cost, and think about consumption and environmentalism also. Now, we're redoing our deck and we really need a nice 8 or 10 foot long big table so for all of our family to be on there, and we're kind of pricing it out, and Costco has a wonderful, beautiful table that we would kind of wanted it. But you know what the price tag was? $1,600. So I said, you know what? No. So we will use the deck boards that we are taking apart. We're going to replane them and we'll make a nice, beautiful farm table out of that material. And it's going to cost us nothing except our time. Period. And we save $1,600 and we're going to be okay with that. So think about environment also. The more you buy, the more the environment also leaves a footprint behind. You really want to think about environment. I'm not saying that you have to become a crazy tree hugger, and that's not the purpose here, but just think about your legacy also to your children. What are you modeling to your children? Are you modeling consumption-based economies? Are you modeling and telling your children, hey, let's reuse, let's recycle, let's repurpose, let's redo all this because this planet is going to be your planet in X amount of years? We will die off, and the next generation will have to live on this planet. And if I can make my tiny, tiny little footprint on this, I will be very, very happy. So, not lastly, use cash. Every time you can, use cash. If you want to have more information, go to my website, andrewraduli.com, and you will have tons of other resources and information, books, and everything else. Thank you so much